in the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military bases and chemical plants may be advised to evacuate.
Let me put this out there. Right now, I believe that every country in the world should be allowed to have nuclear weapons. Take a stroll with me. It's the 1st of July, 1968. It's a hot, sweaty summer in London. It's one of the 3 sites where the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons was signed. At this point, the 23 years since the first detonation of a nuclear device, a handful of countries worldwide have performed nuclear tests all over the place. Nuclear weapons came to this world through an original sin. And unfortunately, nukes would continue to proliferate across the planet. Nukes were exploded in the atmosphere, permanently altering the atmospheric composition. They were exploded in space, accidentally trapping radiation in near-Earth space, and exploded in the oceans, obliterating coral reefs and contaminating food chains, causing cancer in nearby indigenous communities. Despite all that, one thing is sure: the threat of nuclear war itself was very real. To address this threat, most of the international community came together to rein in the spread of nuclear weapons. We still live with the legacy of that treaty in the form of the occasionally recurring stories about Iran's nuclear program. In the conversations and reporting on these issues, there's a shared presupposition that these countries should not be allowed to have nuclear weapons. But let's take a moment and think about that actually. What is the basis for that? How can we tell other independent sovereign countries that they are not supposed to have nuclear weapons? Why are independent, non-nuclear countries punished by nuclear countries who've actually used them, sorry America, for maybe or maybe not pursuing nuclear weapons technology? To answer that, first you've got to take a look at the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in the first place. This treaty states that approved nuclear weapon states are countries which have manufactured and detonated a nuclear weapon before the 1st of January 1967. Everyone who got there before then is granted the title of nuclear weapon state. Anyone who did not get to the finish line on the 1st of January 1967 is out of luck and is not a official nuclear weapon state. These nuclear weapon states are the Soviet Union and its successor state Russia, the United States, the UK, France, and China. All other countries with nuclear weapons acquired theirs after the 1st of January 1967. All the countries who would go on to become nuclear states are those who did not actually sign onto the treaty in the first place, except for North Korea, which actually left the treaty at some point. Interestingly enough, actually, this treaty does not actually provide an enforcement mechanism itself. Of course, that being said, international law does provide the UN Security Council itself with the authority to maintain international peace and security, as stated in Chapter 5, Article 24 of the United Nations Charter. What this means basically is that if the Security Council decides, it can always act against any country credibly threatening international peace and security. And presumably the threat of nuclear holocaust would be one of those situations. When you think credible nuclear threats, depending where you live, you might think of any one of 4 countries specifically, of which only 2 have official enemy status in the West. These 4 countries are Pakistan, India, Iran, and North Korea. Of these 4, only Iran does not yet have nuclear weapons. I wonder if it's in any case a coincidence that the only country not to have suffered recent American aggression is the one not to have nukes. The Nuclear Proliferation Treaty was basically intended as a bargain with three essential pillars. One, was supposed to prevent the spread of nukes. Two, was supposed to spur disarmament of the nuclear weapon states. And three, it arranges or assures access to peaceful nuclear technology. In a way, the thought is that states who already have them keep them and try to reduce their stockpile, and arrange to share their nuclear toys with the rest of the international community. There is also an implicit understanding that states that don't have nuclear weapons will not have to fear nuclear attack. A principle set out in something called the Budapest Memorandum of 1994 basically set out guarantees for Ukrainian security in the wake of it giving up its nuclear weapons held over from the Soviet Union. And the thing is, while it is generally accepted that the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, or NPT, has been moderately successful, the broader goal of a world governed by international law and the pursuit of peace has been hampered by the behaviors of the main architects of these and other agreements like it, the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. Russia, for example, only a couple years ago aided a Ukrainian secessionist movement and then annexed Crimea, in direct violation of the aforementioned 1994 Budapest Memorandum guaranteeing Ukraine's borders at the time, which at the time included Crimea. Of course, you're also probably well aware of the US aggression in Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, and Libya over the last 20 years. Indeed, Libya, for example, had WMDs, weapons of mass destruction, including a nuclear weapons program, but gave them up in favor of normalized relations after they saw what the Americans did to Iraq. Since the presidency of George W. Bush, the US has pressured Iran on its supposed nuclear program, for which there never really has been evidence of anything other than peaceful use, actually, leading to the Iran nuclear deal of 2015. So to be clear, a groundless suspicion from one country has led to a decades-long sanction regime and military provocation about an activity they would technically have the right to do. The position of every nuclear weapon state is that it is solely supposed to be used defensively. It's only supposed to be used as a deterrent. And evidence suggests that it truly is a deterrent. WMDs, or nuclear weapons, have prevented conflicts from escalating. US officials admit that it actually has deterred them from attacking other countries. Thus, ask yourself this question: would the US have invaded Iraq in 2003 had they had nuclear weapons? Would the US already have invaded or otherwise aggressed North Korea had they not had nuclear weapons? No sovereign country should have the right to single-handedly dictate what other countries can or cannot do, no matter how awesome we think we are. Unfortunately, because the permanent members of the Security Council have done such a bad job behaving ourselves, there are a lot of countries out there who are rightfully concerned about their sovereignty being violated by Russia, the US, the UK, China, or France. Full disclosure, I don't like the thought of nuclear weapons, but I understand that countries want to protect themselves. It is a completely rational thing. How do you argue for a nuclear-free world if you're part of a club with essentially the same self-control and introspection capacity as Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein? If Security Council members can't or won't act towards a nuclear weapons-free world maybe our assumption of nukes for none is wrong. Nuclear weapons proliferation is entirely rational and is in fact kind of comparable to gun ownership in lawless areas around the world. When people don't feel safe, they feel the urge to arm themselves. It's rarely individually to threaten others, but most often to protect oneself. Unfortunately, once everyone's armed, accidents happen more quickly, and misunderstandings are more easily fatal. Fact is, I don't have the answer. But I do know that nuclear disarmament won't happen in a world of habitual broken promises, lies, and aggression by those who created the current world order.